Welcome! In this series of videos, we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at the design of alternative graphic user interfaces, or GUIs, to make your application stand out. When you're designing an application with the PowerBasic Windows compiler, it's quite normal to use the Forms application to design your form. This will give you a form and an application that will be similar to other forms users have used in the past, so there will basically be no learning curve. They will find it easy to use your application. However, there are times when you want to strike a balance between ease of use and making your application stand out and look impressive to the user. So that's what we're going to do within this project. We're going to look at a series of alternative GUI designs. So we will start off by using the Forms designer to design a very simple form. We will launch PowerBasic Forms, and the form I have designed is a simple form with one graphics control on the form. Here is our graphics control, and here is the basic form. If we have a look at the styles, we'll see there's nothing particularly special about this form. It has a dialog frame, it has a caption, a sys menu, and it has the minimize and maximize boxes turned on. So if we go in and do a test of this to see how the form behaves, by clicking on the test dialog button on the toolbar, what we'll see here is our form. The graphics control is effectively invisible because we have not yet populated the graphics control. So if we now go back to the Windows compiler itself and have a look at the form that this is designed in code. If you hit the F2 button and have a look at the main dialog. And here is our main dialog. It's a very small layout of a form, and the only additional item we have on it is this Control Add Graphic, specifying where the graphic control sits on the screen. And we have a preparation for the graphic control's use by using the graphics attach command, taking its normal two parameters, the handle of the dialog and the handle of our graphics control. And in here, we're making the color of the background to be black. So let's run the application and see what we get. And there we have our application running with the graphics control showing as a black rectangle. So how can we use this graphics control to make our dialog look a little different? Let's go back to the code. First of all, we will take out this background color of the graphics control. We will comment that out. And if we go back into the code finder and have a look at the event handler, the callback function for our dialog. In here are the instructions that will be followed when our dialog launches. The first thing I want to do is to maximize the dialog. So we'll put a dialog maximize command into the initiate dialog section of this function, so that when our application launches, our dialog will fill the screen. So that's stage one. One change I want to make to the dialog itself is to allow the user to resize the form. So let's go back to the PowerBasic Forms application, and we will make a minor change to the dialog. In the Styles section, there is an entry called Thick Frame. If this is ticked, then the dialog has a sizing border and may be resized by the user. So this will allow our user to resize our dialog. If we run the application now, it will maximize as before. However, if we minimize, the user can then move the dialog around the screen, and if they move to the bottom right-hand corner, they can now resize the dialog. So that's the next stage completed. However, the dialog is the same boring grey background. It would be ideal if we could fill our graphics control with a gradient fill between two colours. This would make the dialog stand out. So we're going to create a function whose job it will be to gradient fill our graphics control. So we're going to put a new event within our event handler, a WMPaint event. This will be triggered when the dialog has a section that needs to be repainted on screen. And we're going to create a new function called gradient fill graphics control, passing it two parameters. The first will be the handle of our dialog, and the second the handle of our graphics control. So here is the skeleton of our new function, gradient fill graphics control, taking its two parameters. We're going to be making use of a number of user-defined types which are inbuilt to the PowerBasic encode files. The first of which is going to be an array. And we're going to be using the try-vertex user-defined type. We'll cover this in a moment. One of the things we will need to know is how big is the graphics control. As the dialog can be resized, we're going to have to resize the graphics control to fill that dialog. So by the time we get to this function, the graphics control may not be the size it was when the application initially launched. So we'll need to check to see just how big it is. And we can do that by getting the client size of our graphics control, using a control get client command, passing two parameters, the handle of the dialog and the handle of the graphics control. What comes out of this command are two values, the width and the height of our graphics control, so we'll need to declare those as local variables. Another thing we're going to have to do is to get the handle of the device context for our selected graphical target. And again, PowerBasic gives you a command to perform this function. And the value we're populating here, the HDC, is going to be a dword. So this is another local variable we're going to have to declare. So next, we're going to need to work out what colors are we going to have on screen. In today's video, I'd like to do a gradient fill from one side of the screen to the other. So we're going to have red on one side of the screen and blue on the other. So this is where the array for the try-vertex which we've set up is going to be used. So we're going to populate each of the values of this one-dimensional array with the 0 and the 1 element, the 0 being the first colour and the 1 being the second colour. As you will see, we're setting the value here from red to the value here being blue. And we're using x and y coordinates, x and y being the top left-hand corner of our graphics control, and for the other one, it's the width and the height of our graphics control. So this will be the entire size of the graphics control. And as the graphics control is going to be resized to be the entire background of our dialog, this should fill the whole thing in. Next, we're going to be calling a gradient fill command. So we're going to need another local variable, which is again a user-defined type. And the user-defined type we're using is gradient rectangle. And we're going to populate those values as 0 for the upper left and 1 for the lower right. Next, we can now call this gradient fill command, passing a number of parameters. The first being the device context, which we populated earlier. Next, the first element of our array, then the number 2, and then grect, which we have just populated, then a 1, and then a constant of gradient fill rectangle h. Having put all that in place, we now want to instruct PowerBasic to redraw the graphics control by using the standard redraw command. So if we run the application now, we will see that our dialog is maximized on screen and our graphics control has a gradient fill between red and blue. We have not yet maximized the size of our graphics control. That is our next task. So back to the code. So this simple function will fill any graphics control between any two colors. So when the command to maximize the dialog is issued, we need at that point to resize our graphics control. There are a few different ways of doing this, but it's also possible that the user will dynamically resize the form at any point in time. So we're going to bring in one of our libraries to make life a little easier for us. We're going to bring in the PB redraw library. This takes a number of constants which we've put on screen to allow us to set the minimum window height and the minimum window width. So I'm setting that to a minimum of 300 pixels high and 480 wide. I've set the maximum to be a large number, which is likely larger than the size of your window. So let's copy in the redraw include library. And there is our library in place. So when we run the application now, that library will be included. So if we go back to our event handler and look for the WM size event, which will be triggered every time the application is resized. And it's in here we wish to resize the graphics control. But just before we do that, we're going to call a function in the library we have just added. This is a function called resize. We're passing it 3 parameters. The dialog handle is 0 and the word initialize. This must be called first to allow the resize code to work. Next, we want to resize our graphics control. So we will create a new function called resize graphics control, whose job it will be to work out just how big the graphics control needs to become. And it will take just 2 parameters, the dialog handle and the handle of the graphics control. And once that graphics control has been resized, we would want to repaint the screen. We've already got an event called repaint, so we'll just trigger that event from this section of the code by quite simply using a dialog send command. This will re-trigger the repaint event without having us to put a call to that function in here. So let's now go and create this resize graphics control function. And here is the skeleton of our new function taking its 2 parameters. Our first task is to work out just how big is the client area of the dialog. How big has the user resized it to? So we're going to create 2 local variables, x and y, to allow us to work that out. Next, we will use the dialog getClient command to populate the x and y variables. So now that we know how big the client area is on our form, we can then set the graphics control to exactly the same size by using the graphic setClient command. And this should be enough to reset our graphics control in size. So if we run our application now, we'll see we're getting a gradient fill, but it's not exactly filling the entire screen. So we've missed something in our coding. So let's go back to the code and see if we can find where the bug sits. I think I've sourced the cause of our problem. When we defined our dialog, we used the dialog new command to create a new DDT dialog. We need to change this because it's currently using dialog units. We need to make it pixels. With the dialog new pixels command in place, everything will be referring to pixels through the rest of the code when it comes to the dialog. And in addition to that, we need to make our graphics control starting at the very top left-hand corner of our dialog. So we'll change these 2 coordinates to 0 and 0. And if we run the application now, we will see that we now have the form maximized on screen and the graphics control is taking up the entire client area of the form. So if we minimize that, our graphics control should resize, which it has, and we should be able to stretch our form and the graphics control will redo the background in real time. So regardless of how much the user plays around with the size of the graphics control, it will still be a gradient fill. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we have created a straightforward form in the PowerBasic Windows Form Designer. We have then created a couple of functions to allow us to resize the graphics control to match the size of our client area on the form. And our second function allowed us to fill a graphics control with a gradient fill, going from red on one side to blue on the other. This gives the background of our form a nice gradient fill, which even if the user maximizes or changes the size of the form, it will refresh. In the next video, we're going to put some additional graphics on the screen to allow the user to select things from a dashboard. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.